Right, my next speaker is Dr. Anthea Rhodes. She's a paediatrician in the Department of General Medicine at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne. She's got an interest in public health and health promotion, and she's the founding director of the RCH National Child Health Poll, a health communications and engagement project. Anthea is passionate about communication and building health literacy. When she's not at work, she loves to cook, eat, and entertain. She says, in reality, though, she spends most of her time being a taxi driver for her kids. I can also say, having spent some time on the dance floor with her last night, that she's also a wonderful dancer. She's talking this morning about the role of social media in healthcare, focusing on the rise of the infodemic through COVID and how this has impacted our patients and their families. And our role of clinicians in this quite complex space. Thanks, Anthea.
Thanks, Becky. Thank you. Yes, I was on the dance floor, and I almost took a photo of the blister on the bottom of my foot this morning as the first slide for the talk, but I thought it might sort of make people feel a bit squeamish, even all the doctors in the room. So before I begin today, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today to share stories and support one another and learn, the Turrbal and Yuggera people who have gathered here for thousands of years before us, and it's a privilege to be here on this land today. I'd also like to take a minute to acknowledge Sarah McNabb, who very kindly swapped spots with me, and this caused a bit of confusion for people, I think, in the written program, so that I could be in Adelaide on Monday, and this is my parent bragging moment, to watch my daughter run for Victoria in the National Cross Country. She's in the middle, and I have to say to all the Queenslanders here that they absolutely cleaned up, and my theory is that the better weather must encourage people to get out and run more, because the Victorians were not nearly as strong as the Queenslanders or the New South Wales team. So today the theme for this session this morning is breaking new ground, and I think, well, we know that challenges lead to innovation, and there's been no end of challenges for all of us over the last few years, and absolutely there's been a lot of new ground broken. To the point where I think at times I found myself just wishing for some old ground, actually, some sort of really obvious, maybe even concreted, no bumps, no paths, no turns ground, but that's really not been the case for most of us for the last couple of years. And instead what we've done is had to chart our way through very much, previously unknown waters with a new challenge, unpredictable weather, literally a new wave at every turn. And the way that we do that best is to gather information so that we can make decisions, so that we can inform what we're going to do next. For our patients and the people that care for them, their parents, their families, their educators and teachers, they have also walked this path in a way that's been very new for them too, and had to gather a lot of information and make a lot of decisions that relate to health and well-being every single day. Social media has been right in the middle of this, as this is the way that information is most rapidly and widely shared today. So regardless of your personal use of social media, your personal beliefs or perspectives about how it fits into your world and our greater world, it is absolutely a part of the way information is shared. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means for us as providers of care to patients and their families. There's a big role, obviously, for social media in terms of our own education, networking, advocacy, but that's not the focus for me in this talk today. It's about what does it mean for us as healthcare providers for the families we look after. So in about June last year, I was in clinic. When I say in clinic, I was doing telehealth. We were in another lockdown in Victoria. And one of the families I saw, the mum of a patient who I've been seeing for quite a while and know pretty well, pretty sensible person, not someone who I'd pick as someone to buy into conspiracy theories, said to me, "Oh, can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question about something?" I said, "Oh, sure, what is it?" She said, "What do you think about this magnet thing?" And I said, "Oh, what do you mean? What magnet thing?" The magnet thing from the COVID vaccine. I said, oh, yeah, look, I don't know a lot about that, but I've seen that, there's some myths out there, and definitely the vaccine's not going to make you magnetic. It's not something that you need to worry about. She goes, "Well, I thought that too, but my brother sent me this video that he got from a friend, and I had a look at it, and it's pretty convincing. Can I show it to you? And I said, sure. So she held it up to the camera, and I had a look at it.
Got the vaccine, so now we're testing the spoon to see.
No way. George,
Max!
George. Right now, come. You gotta come.
The spoon!
So we look at this and we're laughing, right? Everyone here's laughing and thinking, that's ridiculous. How could that be true? But we're scientists or clinicians. We're trained in a certain way. We all think in a very similar way, even though you might not look at the person next to you or in the row in front and think, oh yeah, we're really similar. Fundamentally, we are in a lot of ways. And the key of practicing well is that point where we remember to see things from the eyes of our patients and their families. So for many people in the community, this looked quite convincing. And in fact, it spread around the world, and some of you may have seen it, but via TikTok in a matter of weeks, there were videos like this in every country, every language, sharing and spreading this myth that in some way, the vaccine, whether it was about the metal in it, or the microchipping, or the fact that you are now being tracked forever, was actually taken up around the world. This was not the first time that someone claimed to be magnetic. So this is actually Ivan, and this photo was taken, I think, a similar vintage to Claire Skinner's photo in the long T-shirt, so sort of playing the oboe, 80s, 90s, nothing to do with COVID. But this boy toured Russia making money, claiming that he had superpowers and he was magnetic, until someone insisted that he be doused in talcum powder, and it rapidly became apparent that he was in fact just quite a sweaty boy, and things could stick to him easily. But of course, misinformation and myths are not new. So we're just going to step back a minute to 1998. That was the year that I started med school in UTAS. Anyone else here from Tas Uni? Any other proud graduates? Yes, yes. I met my now husband, although I would not have thought so in 98, but by the end of 6th year in Tasmania, he was looking like a reasonable option. And he's currently at home with my 4 children, and I'm here. So I actually think it's turned out reasonably well. Our 4 children, I should say. And something else happened too. A study was published. Does anyone recognise this person? There's a clue, obviously, in the things in the background. Yeah, Andrew Wakefield. So 1998, everyone in this room, I'm sure, would be familiar with the paper that suggested that MMR vaccine caused autism. This has long since been debunked. We know that. It's been retracted. He's been discredited. And yet, just a couple of years ago, Margie Danchin and I did a study, and we asked parents whether they thought any vaccines could cause autism. 3 years ago. And 1 in 10 Australian parents believe still that vaccines can cause autism, and 30% were not sure. So myths and misinformation are very, very powerful, and even though we can do everything to debunk them, they might just sow a seed of doubt that sits there for a very long time. And social media has become the platform for a lot of this information to spread. So looking at this guy, I don't really necessarily feel I'm going to agree with much that he is saying. And I'm not sure what he thinks is the fake news, potentially the virus. But in fact, what he is right about is that fake news is a type of virus in and of itself. So there was actually a paper published pretty early on in the pandemic, and I'm breaking the rules as well and turning around like Franz did because it's very small over there, where at the time, WHO's Director General made a statement that we're not just fighting the pandemic, we are also fighting an infodemic. Because just as important as the science to work out what on earth is going on is the way we communicate it so that people will listen, believe, and make the right decisions. So why is misinformation such a big thing? Well, the same as anything that's big, it makes money. So at the core of things, the driver is often power and or money. So we can probably all think about ways that there's political gains from misinformation, and I'm not going to spend 10 minutes talking about that and showing slides of Trump, but there is lots of misinformation that sits very deliberately there for political gain, but perhaps even more importantly, and very related, is the financial gain. It's big business. There have been inquiries and studies that demonstrate very clearly that particularly industries that sell vitamins, alternate health practices, often sit behind and sponsor a lot of myths and misinformation. And the most powerful misinformation contains grains of truth. It's not, here's a hammer sticking to my head. It's something that's much, much closer to the truth that allows people to maybe buy in and believe it, and then linked to that is usually a call to action, and behind it is monetary gain. So what does all this mean? It means it's very, very hard to tackle and undo. And you might be thinking solutions here have to come at a regulatory level. And they have. There's been a lot that has happened during the pandemic, driven by WHO and a whole lot of other pathways to tackle social media platforms who are also making a lot of money through the advertising revenue of misinformation because it's so widely shared. But there are things that we can do as individual practitioners as well. And that all hinges on something that we hold that's incredibly powerful. So in studies we've done asking parents about their sources of health information, they consistently tell us that the most trusted source comes from a healthcare provider. Doctors, nurses, allied healthcare providers, they are the people they trust. It's not the politicians, it's not the influencers, it's you sitting in the room. And if you stop and have a think for a minute about what you know about people you care for and their families, they tell you things. Sometimes you wish they would stop telling you things, actually, and just stick to the point. But they tell you all kinds of things. I'm a developmental paediatrician, some of the patients I've seen for years, and the things I know about their families, the extramarital affairs, the pregnancy that they terminated when they were 17, the parent, the things they tell you because they trust you to hold the information. That's a very, very powerful privilege that we all have. And it's worth pausing to think about how we might use that to play a role in tackling this infodemic of misinformation. So the numbers here are not new, but they're staggering. To pull out a few highlights, 2.8 billion daily active users on Facebook. 2.8 billion. Think of that compared to just our population here in Australia. 500 million people viewing Facebook stories every day. 83% of the world's leaders, the poobahs, are on Twitter. Social media is where the conversations are happening. TikTok is on the rise, and I know we've got some great people in the audience who are doing amazing work in the healthcare space on TikTok. 1 billion monthly users and going up quickly. And it's a young audience, it's our patients, and it's young parents, and that's where they're going for health information. Instagram is big for marketing, linking back all the time to a call for action, and that's where a lot of the stuff that relates to sales of products and health-related products happens. When we asked on the health poll where parents got their health information through COVID, 86% of them told us online. 86%. So when they go to the online space, if that's where they are, what do they see? So this is a reasonably old study, and the numbers have probably increased significantly, but a review was done at comparing the amount of expertise-based information, so evidence-based information, driven by things like Franz and the poobahs, driven by all of you in the room, versus experience-based information. So if you jump online and you have a look at some influencers, Beck Judd, for example, has a lot to say about her experience-based information and health advice. The Victorians will know who that is. When this review was done to see, well, how much of this is there? The crowd was out-creating the experts 24-1. And this was before COVID. This figure has probably doubled, tripled, it may even be 10 times. So what is our role in the online space? How can we be a source of truth? There are a lot of ways, and I'm just going to highlight a handful of them for you now, with some examples of things we've done through the Royal Children's Hospital. I mentioned that we have a study called the Health Poll, where we've asked parents over 7 years now regularly about what they know about things and what they don't know. And then we use that information to provide up-to-date evidence-based advice, largely through social media channels. I'm going to give you 2 examples of some really successful things we've done. There's been plenty of things that have not been so successful. There's been lots of stuff that hasn't reached the people we might have liked to. But there's also been some occasions where we have cut through. I'll talk about how and why those things worked and what we can all learn from it. This is Professor Warwick Teague. He's the head of trauma at RCH, a fantastic academic and researcher as well, and he came to our team, the poll team, a couple of years ago, 2019, and said, last year in Victoria, 43% of the kids that were injured or killed in road traffic accidents, and there were 613 of them, were aged between 7 and 11. I think it's got something to do with car restraints. I don't think they're in the right seats. Can we ask parents what they're doing? So we did. We asked on the poll and we found that a staggering 90% of children aged between 7 and 9, not even 10 or 11, were not travelling in any sort of restraint in the car, just an adult lap sash seatbelt. Those of you who work in emergency will have seen the other side of this in the case of a road traffic accident and how increased injuries happen across the neck and the abdomen, and I won't get into the science behind that now. But here in Australia, the legislation is such that from age 7, that's absolutely legal. Parents knew that, they're following the law. It's not safest practice as per NHMRC guidelines. Parents did not know that. So we developed a short campaign and we did a video and we put it out through lots of social media channels. We engaged lots of community-based parent groups and social councils, and we our one video reached over 3 million people in 3 days. We got 4,000 comments on the thread, on the Facebook thread, from parents telling us that they didn't know, that they'd put their kids back in a booster, thanking us for the information. We're scientists, of course, so we did a qualitative analysis of the 4,000 comments on Facebook, and we found 10 themes. And from that, we actually had information to answer more questions. How do I measure my child? What else do I need to do? Where can I buy a seat? 3 weeks after the campaign, we got a call to the communications department from Britax, which is the leading provider of car seats in Australia, to say, what is going on with this campaign? We've sold out of booster seats in Australia. Fast forward a year, and we're into the pandemic. So in Victoria, not only did we have, not that we're counting, was it 6 lockdowns, guys? But we also had an earthquake. During one of the lockdowns, we actually had an earthquake in Victoria. And when you reflect now, it just does seem ridiculous. Anyway, this is Brett Sutton. He's our Chief Health Officer. And he became something of a pin-up boy in Victoria over the pandemic. I don't know if it's a bit like 6 years of med school and then suddenly the husband's looking all right, or 2 years of lockdown and the Chief Health Officer is suddenly appealing to everyone. But I'll admit, I even bought a mug myself. So people were quite happy in Victoria to watch Brett Sutton. They were not as happy necessarily to be getting their health information directly from some of the other government voices, and I'm sure other states and territories experienced the same thing. Suddenly, our politicians were in the news. The scientists were the celebrities. At the Royal Children's Hospital, we learnt, again from surveying families, that they were really stressed about making health decisions for their kids. This is not something they're used to doing on a daily basis. And I take you right back to, the views parents had when they look at that video and think, oh yeah, that could be right, maybe they're magnetic. Parents are suddenly being asked to weigh up risk, take on board new information, deal with the fact that everyone has a different opinion. They're looking at their child, they want to do the right thing. It was incredibly stressful. So we decided to enter the space through social media channels to give expert-based advice regularly through a series of live Facebook events, live webinars that went for an hour. You can see some familiar faces here. Sarah McNabb's on the screen, Margie Danchin. So Andrew Steer, Shadan Tossif there on that one. But we had a series of these where we brought our experts from RCH. I hosted an interview. We had live questions from families, and we dealt with a lot of the myths and misconceptions live, right there. We had to have people moderating the feed. We were trolled. We had all kinds of things happening. It was not straightforward, but we were a voice of truth for families in a very, very noisy space. This particular video was the one that we did about the Delta strain when it had just emerged and what it meant for families and their kids and decisions about school. And this is estimated based on our analysis of reach to have been seen by 1 in 2 Victorian parents. So it had a huge amount of reach, and we got a lot of feedback and positive reinforcement that we were being heard and that families were also being heard as they told us things on the channels and we answered their questions. So there are a couple of great examples of when things worked well. But in the last few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about the risk and also my tips from this experience over a number of years now. Watch out for the rabbit holes, and there are some, always. How do you stay out of the weeds? This is a picture of an actual sticky note on my actual desk that has been there for a long time. And at the core of every decision we make, whether it's what you're going to do on social media or whether it's what treatment you're going to prescribe for a patient, we always need to think, for what purpose? What am I trying to achieve here? So producing content for content's sake is not purpose. We need to understand what we're trying to do. And again, the scientists in us need to be prepared to evaluate that and understand if it's working. Social media is social. And the core of that concept is that it is supposed to be two ways. It's about a conversation. It's about engagement. So as much as we can share, we should also listen. And those couple of examples where it worked really well for us at RCH, we were listening. We had a lot of communication in on channels, we looked at it rapidly, we understood what to do next, and then we went back out with new information, with a new plan, so that we could actually meet parents where they were at. This is a picture of my kids sort of cooperating, which happens occasionally. Most of the time I feel like I'm refereeing difficult conversations, and so at our house we have the rules of chat. And these are the 3 things that we say you should ask yourself before you say something. I mean, this works maybe 20% of the time. And sometimes it comes back to bite me. Mum, is that helpful? Doesn't count when you're talking to Dad. That's what we say. No. So, but these are the 3 things to think about if you're going to post something online. Is it true? Don't deal in lies. Is it kind or respectful? Both, ideally. And is it helpful? These 3 things, if what you want to share ticks these boxes, go for it. If you're not sure, if you're hesitating, if something doesn't feel quite right, pause. Write it down, save a draft, come back to it tomorrow. Do not engage. What you don't say is just as important as what you do. Stick to your knitting. This is a great piece of advice that was shared last week by Jill Sewell, a great mentor and colleague of mine at a conference. Stay in your lane. We're not experts at everything, so if you wouldn't weigh in on that in real life, don't weigh in on it when you're online. So you might be listening to all of this thinking, well, yeah, I'm still not really interested in social media. It's not my thing. I'm steering clear of it. I don't want to get involved. That's okay. It's not for everyone, and you might do it for a while and feel it's not great for your mental health. Stop. That's okay as well. But if you're interested, there are benefits. And some people would say, Brian Vartabedian, who is a gastroenterologist in Texas and a thought leader in this space, that we, as a group, have an ethical obligation to share what we know, trustworthy, factual information, evidence-based, with the community in the online space. So if you feel like it's not for you, then I ask you, create a safe space when you are with your patient and family to at least talk about what they're seeing online. You don't have to be online. You can still help them navigate all that information, help them make decisions, just like we do in clinical practice, because at the end of the day, the most powerful thing we can do with that trust that we have is be there alongside our patients through the journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we all really enjoyed that. And I'm sure I won't be the only person taking your Post-it note idea and just popping it up there as a general reminder. Are there any questions, comments, reflections that I can see waving?
Hi, Anthea, David from Melbourne. Here. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it helpful? What if the answer, once you've posted it, is that it's fake, it's lies, and it doesn't help me? We heard from Margie a couple of days ago about her being trolled while she was presenting information on COVID vaccines, and I thought that was pretty confronting. She was saying true things, she was being helpful, I assume she was being kind, and what do you do about that? Because everybody's truth is just that little bit different.
Yeah, great question. So what do you do in response to the comments you get back? Is that the question, David? Yeah. So actually, the rule still applies. So you have what you know to be truthful, and in situations where that dialogue can be contained with restating what you have as evidence of your facts, then that's valuable. But it's really often best not to engage in dialogue with those people who are of a very different perspective, disposition, and are there really not to have a meaningful conversation that will end in rational, decision making, but rather with an agenda that is definitely to derail your message. So it would be very rare that I would advise any response. So for the most part, that is best left alone and not engaged with. And often what we find, certainly in the RCH online chat community, is that parents moderate it with each other themselves. So they kind of come back and sort of shut it down. We also have a policy that we will take away or take down things that are false and block posts. So where you've got an organisation and you might be looking at what you're doing on social media and having an active channel with conversation, then it's really important, and your communications department will probably have this if you talk with them. If they don't, they should. A policy for users that engage that allows you to remove things that are misinformation.
Hi there, Anna, Kimberley, WA. The 1 in 2 people in Victoria that accessed your chat is incredibly impressive, and I was curious about the demographics and whether you'd looked at that and who is accessing and who were those that didn't.
Yeah, great, thank you. So important to clarify that as well as having that live event on Facebook, which was tuned into by a number of thousands of parents at the time, the ways that people could view that afterwards included viewing it on Facebook, it was recorded and available for viewing later, but also on YouTube so that it was freely accessible. And one of the ways that we promoted that was through the all-school emails. So we had cooperation with the Department of Education, and links were sent out and promoted to families by email, and if they went on Facebook, they could view it on YouTube, just straight through the internet. So that was how it became accessible, because not every parent's on Facebook, obviously. In terms of your question about demographics, so obviously the most challenging demographic group to reach is really those that are not able to communicate in English at a level of literacy that will allow them to access this information. We do have, there are a lot of channels that will actually allow for translation, although it's not that accurate always, that exist already online, so there's some of that we don't control. The written resources that support the information, of which there are many, we do provide in translated 10 languages through RCH. So the biggest challenge for us is reaching those families, and we know that in Victoria, for example, about 7% of parents don't speak English at a level of literacy that would allow them to be able to understand a video. So it's actually much smaller than we might imagine, and for those groups there are much more targeted, nuanced communication needed, and we saw that through COVID. We saw it through vaccine education, and one of the ways we addressed that actually at RCH was we had a series of cultural communications champions who are bilingual or multilingual clinicians, doctors, nurses, other healthcare providers, who recorded short format key information pieces in their own language, and they were shared both through our channels and also through cultural champions in the community. So we didn't reach everyone with the main piece of work, but we did have other ways for key messages to reach other demographic groups.
Thank you, Anthea. I'm seeing lots of love for this on Twitter, and you'll be happy to know that everyone's being very kind.
Oh, good. Yes. Otherwise, you would have had to go back and delete it.
Let's say a big thank you again to Anthea.
Thank you.